The concept of a Pokemon MMO has been on fans' minds for decades at this point. Imagine a game where you could travel across a region with your friends in real time, and then battle each other or take on greater threats once the main adventure is over. But obviously, neither Nintendo nor Gamefreak have provided us with such a thing, leaving it up to talented fans to take on the role themselves. However, it's quite common knowledge that MMOs of any genre can be pretty time-consuming, with most people suggesting it's unhealthy to play more than one at a time on a consistent basis. So after some research, I found the 4 most popular fan-made Pokemon MMOs, and decided to dive into each of them, with the goal of breaking down their strengths and weaknesses to help you decide which one is the best for you. But without further ado, my name is Avery, and let's get started. But before we continue, I'd like to talk about an upcoming monster taming game called Elestrals Awakened, and while this is a sponsored segment, I am actually involved with its development, building the maps and levels of the world. But it's an HD 2D monster catching RPG from the creators of the Elestrals TCG, a brand led by veteran Pokemon YouTubers A-Drive and Shady Penguin, who combined have 40 years of experience in the genre. Set in ancient Greek mythology, you'll explore a massive world, bond with over 100 unique Elestrals, and construct a powerful team to challenge the Divines. Battles revolve around the unique Spirit Point mechanic, where health and energy are a single resource, creating a dynamic combat system where every ability and attack is a trade between power and survival. Awakened establishes the tones and themes of the Elestrals universe, connecting directly to the TCG and future projects. But by backing the Kickstarter before November 7th, you'll be able to obtain alpha and beta access, receive exclusive in-game unlocks, purchase physical Kickstarter promo packs, or even become an NPC or caster in-game. And in doing so, you aren't just supporting the game, but also my own journey as a game developer. So don't wait any longer, and support the Elestrals Awakened Kickstarter campaign using the link in the description or pinned comment below. I thought I would start with what's clearly the most popular fan-made Pokemon MMO, and that's PokeMMO. This game has been around for over a decade now, and has been praised by others as the king of fan-made Pokemon MMOs, constantly maintaining an active community and player base, while many others continue to rise and fall. Having played it many years ago on an account I unfortunately don't remember the login to, I do have a lot of fond memories of traveling through the multiple regions with my friends at the time, and then battling after reaching certain milestones. But something that most people might be worried about before jumping into it is what exactly is there to do once you finish all of those regions. Sure, the adventure was fun, but most people will want to keep playing and not have the journey feel like a waste. Well, PokeMMO's endgame is kind of just your normal Pokemon endgame. You can complete the Pokedex, try to dominate the ranked ladder, or even just shiny hunt. I do think that these goals mean a bit more here though, due to the game being multiplayer and having the ability to compare and even show off your accomplishments to other players. But something I also want to talk about is the storyline, or single-player experience, and how upon starting fresh in 2025, kind of deterred me. Due to the game being built on ROMs of the first 5 generations, they look and play almost exactly like they do in the official titles, with the only major differences being a smarter trainer AI and a slight increase to the base difficulty. This is something that likely wouldn't bother the average Pokemon fan, but for me and likely many of my regular viewers, replaying unmodified versions of the official regions is not very exciting, especially with how many times I've experienced them through various ROM hacks. Out of all the games on this list, PokeMMO plays the most like a regular Pokemon game, which I think is definitely one of its biggest strengths, but is also the reason why I wasn't able to invest much time into it in 2025. But that's very much of a personal nitpick than anything else, which is very evident with how active PokeMMO has remained over the years. However, from my perspective, there is one weakness this MMO has compared to the others in this video, and that's a potential lack of a future of major content updates. Like I mentioned before, the game game is built on ROMs of the official games, meaning to my understanding, only map-based content from those games can be added. And while the Sinnoh and Johto region were delivered in the last 5 years, the next step being a 3DS game leads me to believe that the game could go a very long time without seeing the addition of another region or generation of Pokemon. From my own research, I have seen the feasibility of it discussed, and I don't disagree that it's possible, but the modification of the 3DS games is still in its very early stages, with the last decade only seeing hacks that recolor a few models, modify dialogue, and rebalance Pokemon-related content. Either way, I still think it's a solid MMO. Like I mentioned earlier, the game is incredibly active despite all my nitpicks, and it's playable on Windows, Android, Mac, and even iOS devices. Coming in at second place in popularity is Pokemon Revolution Online. While I was doing research for this video, I quickly learned that most of the comments online strongly suggested PokeMMO to be the much better option over PRO. But after playing both of them myself, I personally disagree. Unlike PokeMMO, where I quickly lost motivation to continue playing after learning how vanilla the game was, PRO immediately had me hooked, with the almost completely opposite experience. Rather than using maps ripped straight from the official titles, PRO comes with completely custom ones, increasing both the size and detail of all the routes and towns you're familiar with, and even a few new ones. With the first 4 canon regions to explore all being built from the ground up, that's an insane amount of permanent content. If you're wondering what I mean by permanent content, well, PRO actually has a collection of limited time regions that will appear during big holiday events. For example, the months of summer allow you to explore the Vulcan Islands, and the month of October lets you visit Phantasm Land. Of course, these regions are a lot smaller than the primary ones, so you shouldn't have to worry about speedrunning through them during the time they're active. But outside of just looking pretty, how do these regions actually feel to play through? Well, you'll start in Kanto, and make your way through it as you would in the mainline games. Routes have an updated Pokemon roster, and training Pokemon didn't feel like a chore, thanks to the EXP share you could obtain after the 3rd gym, or one that's active during limited time events, which from my experience seems to be way more active throughout the year than not. There is a bit of a custom story, but I'll be honest, it didn't strike me as interesting, or anything worth giving too much of my attention. What I did appreciate though was the plethora of side quests to complete, giving me a reason to spend more time in each area, and rewarding me well for what I'd consider to be pretty easy tasks. Compared to PokeMMO, this game had a very enjoyable adventure experience that, combining everything, likely leaves you with about 100 hours of permanent content to enjoy. But of course, this is still an MMO, and a good amount of people will want their progress to mean something once they've reached the end of their journey. In my opinion, the most interesting late game activity offered are dungeons, comprising many floors and rooms filled with enemy Pokemon and puzzles. They can be explored on your own or with a group of players, and offer different challenges and rewards, making them very worthwhile and enjoyable PvE experiences. But on the contrary, the PvP in this game doesn't sound very enjoyable. There's, for some reason, a complete lack of breeding, meaning in order to get a Pokemon with good IVs, you'll have to scour the wild for them. Another weakness this game has compared to PokeMMO is that it cannot be played on iOS devices. So with all of that said, if you're a more casual player looking for a long-term adventure with your friends, or even just on your own, then I highly suggest PRO. But if you're someone who wants to dedicate their endgame to PvP and competitive battles, then I think PokeMMO will serve you a much better experience. While those two MMOs are obviously the most popular by a long shot, there are of course some others that, despite a smaller player base, still find themselves becoming worthwhile experiences thanks to their unique or casual-friendly mechanics. And one that I think definitely falls into the casual half of that description is Pokemon Blaze Online. Before I dive any deeper into this game, I feel I first need to explain what makes it so casual-friendly. Obviously, not everyone has the free time time or even the desire to dump hundreds of hours into a single Pokemon MMO. Blaze Online alleviates that worry with incredibly fast-paced battles. I think the biggest thing I could complain about the first MMO in this video is the battle speed. Not that it was too slow, but having to replay through the official regions for the dozenth time at close to default speed made the content feel way more repetitive than it should have. But combine that increased battle speed with fast loading animations, EXP being shared with your whole party, and Pokemon centers only needing you to walk up to the front desk to have your full team healed, I felt that the game valued my time way more than any other MMO on this list. And thanks to all that, the game's massive amount of content will be incredibly easy to digest, as you'll not only have the Kanto, Hoenn, and Sinnoh region, but also the custom region of Shavalo. Now, while that all sounds great, one weakness Pokemon Blaze Online does suffer from is that it has a much smaller player base. While PokeMMO and PRO are, as I said before, the most popular fan-made Pokemon MMOs, the gap in popularity between them and everyone else is pretty sizable. But for Blaze Online's case, I don't think that has anything to do with the state of the game. As doing some research, it's obvious that the game is kind of just underrated. It receives content updates pretty frequently, with even players outside of its main community referring to it as the most updated Pokemon MMO. I think Pokemon Blaze Online is definitely worth it if you're trying to get into Pokemon MMOs, thanks to the fact of how quickly you can progress because of the quick pacing, and the fact that it can be played on both Windows and Android devices. The last MMO on this list is PokeOne. Right off the bat, I want to immediately express what makes this MMO worth playing, and that would be the co-op. From the start of your adventure, you can party with up to 2 other players, and then complete every story fight together at the same time in the same battle. Obviously, this will make the game inherently easier, but it still sounds incredibly fun and is a great way to enjoy a classic Pokemon adventure with a friend or family member. However, I myself chose to play in single player, and still had a pretty good time. The aspect of PokeOne I found to be the most impressive would be the overworld. The entirety of Kanto, Johto, and Unova have been rebuilt from the ground up using a completely 3D layout, and to my surprise, it looked really good. The maps were well decorated with good quality 3D models, and the layouts weren't a one-to-one of the official maps either, having more detail and additional paths for you to explore. And similarly to Pokemon Revolution Online, you'll also have quests and bounties to complete for additional rewards. Although, as fun as it was to progress through these semi-3D regions, I feel that the pacing of PokeOne is a lot slower than it should be. Between the loading time for wild Pokemon encounters, short stutters when picking up items, and early routes consisting of a lot of twists and turns, the adventure in this game will definitely take you longer than it would in the other 3 MMOs. But if you do manage to make it through the main story, the end game that awaits you is pretty rewarding. After beating the Elite Four or completing certain milestones in your respective region, you'll be able to take on powerful bosses on your own or in co-op with friends. These bosses will drop money, items, and even rare Pokemon if you're lucky enough. Overall, the game has a lot of content and is pretty active, with around 200 to 400 players online, depending on the day of the week. So if the slowish pacing doesn't bother you, then I definitely suggest giving it a try, especially if you have a friend you'd like to take on the adventure alongside you. Now, there are a few extra details and criticisms I'd like to discuss that pertain to most, if not all 4 MMOs in this video, and I thought it would be easier for both myself and all of you watching to just go over it all at once, rather than repeating myself each segment. First and foremost, it would obviously be incredibly scummy of me to not bring up the fact that these 4 MMOs do in fact have a donations system that lets you buy items using real-world currency. From my experience and research, I didn't find any of these shops to be pay to win, instead just selling cosmetics or items that slightly increase the speed you can complete story content. A lot of this currency could also be obtained for free, like PokeOne's purchasable gift boxes being pretty plentiful by just progressing the story or completing side content. If I had found these systems to be scummy or pay to win, I obviously wouldn't even be showcasing their respective games in a positive manner. And I still don't blame anyone for not wanting to play these games, even with that not being the case. And before I get dozens of comments saying that these MMOs aren't worth playing, as these systems risk them being taken down, I will say that while I don't disagree with that sentiment, most of these games have been around for nearly a decade, if not longer, with little to no pushback from Nintendo. But again, I won't blame you for not wanting to play them for that reason. A bit less important, but something I still feel I need to mention, is that other than PokeMMO, these games were really lacking in both the music and animations department. Obviously, I don't expect fan projects to go above and beyond with completely custom move animations, but it was a little disappointing to see 95% of them either lacking or repeating the same animations and or sound effects. Additionally, most of the battles would use the same music, which combined with a lack of sound effects, I found myself playing with sound turned off more often than not. But reaching the end of this video, I'm sure you're wondering why I chose these 4 games specifically. Because while there are many others, one in particular I hold near and dear, I think they mostly either lack the features or even just the player base to truly solidify themselves as a Pokemon MMO, rather than just a Pokemon fan game that can be played online. I think the 4 that I chose will definitely serve you the former, as online Pokemon games with hundreds of other players that you can battle, trade, or even complete endgame content with. However, if you found yourself uninterested in any of these games, then maybe you're like me and just prefer single-player fan games. So if that's the case, then be sure to subscribe for a nearly endless catalog of offline Pokemon fan games and ROM hacks. But anyways, thank you for watching, thank you to my channel members for their continuous support, and have a nice rest of your day.